Trigger warning. Discussion of death, violence and suicide will occur during this stream. Help is available. Speak with someone today. 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Nom Watch Review, part of the Nom Talk network. On this show, we review the latest film drop or a throwback celebrating a milestone while eating and drinking our favorite movies, snacks, and drinks. I'm your host, Jennifer, and right now I'm enjoying a Two Towns Cider House. Oh, losing it in the screen there. This is their Prickly Paradise, which is my current favorite flavor of everything, prickly pear everything. And I'm eating string cheese because as much as I would enjoy a steak from Eddie's, like the characters in the movies, that just wasn't in the cards. So I'm going with some string cheese. And with me tonight, I have some great guests. I'm going to start with Carolyn. How are you doing tonight? And what are you eating and drinking?
So hi guys, I'm Carolyn. I'm doing well. It was a long day, but not a, I was falling into sleep, and then I remembered that I had to go do this podcast. See, that's what I do. I do the puns. I'm really excited to talk about Hitchcock because I've been rediscovering my love of the visual effects of the man, and the visual effects in Hitchcock are some of the best, as well as some of the metaphors that he used. And for food, I have a mozzarella balsamic sandwich top.
Ooh.
Fresh heirloom tomato and a garlic bread spread.
Yummy.
That sounds
and also
amazing.
a soda. So.
Nice. Great. Well, Julie, how about you?
Hi, I'm Julie, and I am eating a quesadilla, which doesn't really have much to do with the movie, but I couldn't think of much. And I also, steak was not in the cards for me tonight. So I do have some Spanish rice. Throw to Carlotta Valdez, anyone? Does that count?
Perfect.
Yeah, sure. We'll go with that. And some Minute Maid strawberry agua fresca.
Delicious. So, awesome. All right. Yeah. Last and certainly not least, Kenji, what are you doing tonight? How are you doing tonight? And what are you eating and drinking? Kenji, you're muted, honey.
There we go. Hey, so I'm Kenji. Thank you so much for telling me that I was muted. I'm doing great, except for that little flub. I just ate, so I'm not really eating much right now. But I did have katsu. I had chicken katsu, so that was yummy. And my water is over there in a canteen. I'll have to go grab that. But yes, I'm excited to talk about this movie.
Great. Well, I'm excited to be here tonight. It's my first time hosting, so be gentle. And it's my first time chatting with Julie and with Kenji, so I'm excited to get to chat with you tonight. Carolyn and I go way back to last year. Disney buddies. So awesome. So tonight we are talking about the 1958 classic by Hitchcock, Vertigo, and we did want to include a trigger warning that there are mentions of suicide in this movie, and it could come up in the discussion. So we didn't want anyone to be taken by surprise. We are also, in light of that, and in light of the fact that May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and that's something that's near and dear to my heart. We are fundraising for the Trevor Project as well tonight. So please, anybody who's here joining with us, definitely consider giving just whatever you can. Every little bit helps. Such a great project that contributes to LGBTQIA+ youth and support for them when they don't really have anyone else to support them and to support their mental health. So it's definitely something that's really important that we all need to support. So thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Now let's talk about the movie. So when was the first time everybody saw this movie? For me, probably college, when I lived in San Francisco for the second time. So in the 90s, I, obviously was not around in 1958. It's kind of nice to actually be reviewing a movie I wasn't already in high school when it came out. So that's pretty exciting for me. I just really enjoyed this movie when I first saw it. It's an interesting psychological story, and it's Hitchcock. I'd seen Psycho, I'd seen The Birds, all the big ones, but this is kind of it's a classic, but it's a lesser known one. So I was interested to see why wasn't it as popular you can kind of see that when you watch it. It's not as sensational as maybe The Birds or Psycho, but it's still got a lot in it for a little bit for everybody. So, Julie, I'll start with you. How did you feel up to watching the film? When did you first see it? Sorry.
No, you're fine. Believe it or not, I know this was the first time that I've seen it in my life. I don't know. I think when I was younger, I was scared of watching like Hitchcock films because my mom would really like talk them up a lot about how scary they were. Now I realize that like scary back then was a different than scary as now, but this is when I was a kid, so I think maybe I just subconsciously avoided them for a while. I did grow up with like the AFI's like lists of, like best movie scenes, 100 best movie scenes, those kind of things. So I was very aware of it because I know they pointed out some of the scenes, like the bell tower scene and that kind of stuff. But like, I didn't really know much about it other than that. And so I'm a newbie, virgin to this movie.
That's fair. It's never too late to see a classic. So welcome to Vertigo.
And I've been trying to catch up on that lately. So it's perfect timing for this one.
Awesome. Kenji, how about you?
So I feel like of the Hitchcock movies, I feel like this is the one that I've actually seen the most, oddly enough. Like it was first shown to me by my my high school teacher. He was a much older gentleman, so he was showing us all these really classic films that like a lot of the kids were like bored by, but I loved that we were watching like old Bing Crosby movies and stuff like that. And then I watched it like twice again, 2 different times in college, and I just was like, okay. Since then I haven't seen it at all, so it was actually great to revisit it again and kind of just refresh myself with this movie. And like you said, like, it's always great to go back to an old classic.
Definitely. And Carolyn, you and I have talked classic movies before. So what's it with you and Vertigo? When did you see it?
Picture this. You're like 10 or 11 and you're scrolling through the TV at your grandmother's house and you see that blue and white stock, like looking down, shaking footage. And your grandma goes, "That's Jimmy Stewart." And you go, "Who?" And your grandma starts trying to explain. And then you get bored, but you're still visually remembering, this image. You're still visually seeing it. And it kind of haunts you for 2.5 seconds. And then you didn't see the rest of it. And then you watch it like you're watching The Simpsons and you see the exact same effect in an episode of The Simpsons as a Simpsons gag, because the early seasons of The Simpsons were great. And they would do that kind of stuff. And I was talking to my mom, and my mom was explaining the situation. My parents, much like Kenji's parents, much like, all of us, they put you through the ringer as far as like, classic films. And my mom was like, Vertigo. Vertigo admittedly didn't stick with me as like, say something like The Birds, Psycho, or Rear Window, which is the other one that's, constantly a pop culture thing. But the iconic VFX image of this is something that's not really talked about. So I actually sat down and watched the full film a while ago. I think I was like maybe like at 15, 16. I revisited it, and the sanitarium stuff, it really is a time capsule that incorporates, and it's not that it bothered me in a bad way. It's just like you really get an opportunity to look at it and you go, we thought that. So yeah, but I really enjoyed it. It's definitely up there and a must for film fans.
Yes, definitely. And it's Hitchcock at one of his best. So popcorn buckets, and Heartless redeemed "You're So Punny," and he redeemed it for you, Carolyn. So I'm going to pass it right back to you with your popcorn rating first. How many popcorn buckets would you give it? And can you work that into a pun for us as well?
Well, if you'll give me a moment, if you'll, I see what she's doing. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend Jennifer here is trying to butter me up. But if you'll let me pause, I'll pop off. And what's that? You're saying I'm giving you 4 popcorn. I'm giving a popcorn rating for you, or 4. Let's do 4 popcorn buckets. 4 popcorn buckets, and I hope my puns weren't too corny for you, my friend.
I think Heartless got his bits worth, definitely. Julie, how about you? What's your rating for this movie?
I'm going to give it 4 popcorn buckets. I agree with all of the visually stunning, like cinematography and techniques and stuff like that, especially for that time period. I had a few things wanting from the plot, but overall, I thought it was a pretty solid movie. I mean, I do love the classics, and having watched it for the first time, despite the fact that it was in the 50s, like, I enjoyed it. So
great. And Kenji, what was your rating for this one?
So I gave this movie a 4.5 buckets, and it's because this is a great classic film of the era. It definitely is a prime example of what entertainment and movies were like of the time. So it's great to always it's always great to see where we've how far we've come, and sometimes how far we've fallen, in our quality of films. And so it's always good to kind of see what a good film can be. It's a great film. The only problem is that sometimes it is a capsule of the time period that it is, which sometimes may not always be everyone's cup of tea. So that's why I knocked it down just a little bit, because it's a great film, but it's not perfect, and it's only for that one reason. And that's really, I'm picking hairs, really. But also, I mean, there's a lot of stuff with the plot too that I have some issues with too, because I just feel like it's a messed up movie. It's really messed up too. So like that's why I'm kind of like, again, 4.5.
I also gave it a 4.5. It is a pretty messed up movie. Silence of the Lambs is my favorite movie, so obviously I have a soft spot in my heart for the more messed up, the better. For me, a lot of it is just the beautiful backdrop of my favorite city, San Francisco. We see Point Dolores, Mission Dolores behind me here. And just other beautiful scenery. I grew up at my grandmother's house, my great grandmother's house. So the views out the windows that you see at Midge's house when Scotty's, hanging out with his ex-fiance, which isn't weird at all, and things like that. Those are the views I grew up with. Those rolling streets, that was the panorama like of my childhood. And so to see it again, even in this really creepy, weird story, it kind of is a comfort and a safety to me. But also, this is a really interesting story about mental health in many aspects, not just about not Carlotta, Madeliene, Carlotta, whoever she is. It's not just about hers, but Scotty's as well. And so, we're going to get a little more into that, but also Cue Ball gave his rating in the chat. So I want to share that. And he says, my rating for this one is 4 out of 5. It's a good, solid thriller film. I mean, it has a legend, Jimmy Stewart. Absolutely. And I mean, when I watched it years ago, it was one of those movies that you go, what was that? So many mind-blowing moments in that movie, twists and turns. Hitchcock, a brilliant writer and director who has a dry, dark sense of humor as well. It kind of shows in the movie. And yes, it does. So just to recap for people who maybe haven't seen the movie in a while or aren't familiar with it, the movie starts with a rooftop chase over San Francisco, which if you've ever been to San Francisco or lived there, that seems like nightmare fuel. So, they're running across, and there's a detective who has a fear of heights. There's an accident and a cop falls to his death accidentally, and that scars this poor detective for life. So now, while he recovers, he starts hanging out with his ex-fiance, super weird, played by Barbara Bel Geddes, who some people still may be too young, but may know her as the mom from Dallas, the original version of Dallas. And just cute as a button. She's an artist. She designs underwear for a department store. Just a delight. And apparently her assessment is another severe emotional shock is the only cure for his vertigo. And they talk about the corset he wears. It's just very awkward and weird. And Then out of the blue, he gets a call from an old acquaintance from college asking Scotty, who is now retired from the police force, to follow his wife, Madeliene, because her mental state seems fragile and she's been behaving weird. She's spending all her time doing whatever. She seems to lose time. She goes on a trip to the beach, or no, she went to Golden Gate Park to sit by the lake, but there were 94 miles on her car. So this guy, a little creepy, he's keeping pretty serious tabs on his wife. So Scotty follows the wife around. She goes and sits at the grave of this woman who lived in the 1800s named Carlotta Valdez. And then she goes to an art museum and sits in front of her portrait and just stares at Carlotta. And then she goes to this hotel. But when he goes inside to find her, she's not there, according to the woman at the front desk. So he then goes and finds a historian to learn about Carlotta Valdez, why maybe he's trying to figure out what Madeleine's obsession with her is. She was a mistress of a wealthy man and bore his child. And then she died by suicide when the man did not return her affections, which sounds to me a lot like a La Llorona origin story, if we're really going to dig into it. But obviously Hitchcock didn't go that direction. So now the husband feels she's possessed by Madeliene. It turns out that it's her great-grandmother. She has no knowledge of this. She doesn't remember it. So Scotty keeps tailing her. He runs into her at Fort Point, which is right under one side of the Golden Gate Bridge where it's connected to San Francisco. For those not familiar, she jumps into the bay and he jumps in after her and rescues her. So that's their journey so far. Kenji, what do you think about this wacky beginning to their story?
Well, I remember the first time I watched it, I thought it was going to be kind of like just like a boring detective story, honestly, because like I remember my grandmother had this actually had this on VHS, but it was in Japan, and so it was all in Japanese writing, and I didn't quite know what it said, so I was like, I don't know what this is, and like, so watching this, I thought it was going to just be another boring detective story. At first, I thought it was going to be like another, like, let me guess. They're going to meet each other and they're going to fall in love, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So like that's kind of where I thought it was going to go. And then, of course, it goes into a very interesting direction after that. And that's kind of where I did the like the posture check, and I kind of like sat a little bit more forward in my seat. And but I thought it was at first I thought it was just a typical, setup to like a detective like meeting the damsel kind of story. So I was really surprised how what seems so insignificant can end up becoming something so dramatic and problematic by the end of it. So yeah, it was really cool. Like, I mean, ultimately it's kind of like it's a very sneaky opening, and it kind of shows like just kind of like the genius in a way just of how Alfred Hitchcock, there we go, I can't talk today, is just his prowess as just a movie creator and just as a filmmaker. He's really good. And everyone should really check out his work if they haven't.
Yes.
Caroline, how did the first part of the road he took us down make you feel about the movie and where it was headed?
So prior to doing this, I read a lot of articles and think pieces on it. And there's a couple that I'll go into. But first and foremost, my first impulse after rewatching it today was, if this was a modern film, this was made this year, this was a remake, there would be much more of a play up on the supernatural element. It wouldn't be subtle. It wouldn't be like her staring at the portrait. It wouldn't be the suspense. There would be he'd be rubbing his eyes and he'd look and there'd be, a random woman just standing next to her, and then she'd be gone, and then a random person, and then something popping out somewhere, and people would be like, oh, it popped out, it's a ghost. And actually, because I can give you an example of the same technique, not the same story at all. but the same technique that came out in a movie that was very recent. So it would have to walk a really fine line. But in the recent movie, like I said, the storylines are it's still person. And anyway, there's a character that in the movie Tar who's tormented by something wrong that they did, and no spoilers, but something wrong. This character is genuinely a terrible person, but they're tormented by something wrong that they did. And what people pointed out afterwards is that nobody noticed that there's ghosts in the background following the main character. And so that's they're constantly following the main character. So I imagine if they remade this, it would be something like that, and that would completely diminish the payoff of the story, because you would never be able to see where it goes at the end. So seeing this, and you really have to look at it, my recommendation for people seeing it is, if you see it, look at it, don't look at it from a modern perspective, except that it is a time capsule of sorts. Because if you look at it, you're going to expect something like the Conjuring, where you're going to have a person just popping out places, and that's not it at all. Or you're going to have something like Tar, but nobody really pays attention to that kind of stuff. People miss the subtlety of it because you don't know. And it's just, so I like where it was going. It reminded me that our spooky movies these days rely way too much on jump scares.
Definitely. That's a good take. Julie, what about you?
Yeah, well, having like gone into it, like never having seen it, and like I said, I had grown up like knowing about it, but like I purposely tried to not remember anything about it, and I really didn't. I didn't remember, so I went into it. I didn't want to like know anything about it. I just wanted to like watch it for what it was and be surprised and whatever. And I knew it was Hitchcock, so I knew, like, of course he always has his crazy twists and turns, you know. So I think from like right away I was trying to figure out like what the turn was going to be, and he does a very good job in this movie. I didn't figure it out for quite some time. And the beginning is nice. It just sets the tone, and it really made me fascinated with the Madeliene character, like, because I was just like, wow, is she really like possessed? And again, I also agree with what Carolyn was saying about the supernatural element, like, because I kind of was like, I didn't think that Alfred Hitchcock really did a lot of the supernatural. Like, he did a lot of like psychological stuff and like human nature stuff, like, but I was like, oh, is he really going there? That's interesting. But now that you said that, like, yeah, it's true. Like, a modern movie would have totally gone more into the supernatural. So it was very like subtle, but it worked because it still made me like very curious as to like who this character was, like what Madeliene was doing, like, and then where this was all going. I was like she's very captivating. Barbara Novak like just has a way of like captivating you. You're like, what is she gonna do next? So yeah.
We have another comment from Hugh Ball, and he says, my take on Mr. Stewart's character is a man who tries to make himself, and of how and why these chains of events around him. You kind of follow along with him, and in a way, you'll be screaming at the screen for the answer. Yes, it starts slowly like a lot of Hitchcock films, but the buildup will literally take you by the hand along for this strange ride, some would say. And I would definitely agree, but it does build up quickly because he rescues her from the bay, and then the next day Madeliene stops by to bring Scotty a letter thanking him. So they spend the day together, like you do when you're married. So they go to the Muir Woods, which is beautiful, and they take this beautiful drive up on 17 Mile Drive, which it made me want to go visit the Bay Area, honestly. And she has a lot of erratic behavior. She runs around towards the ocean. Scotty grabs her, they hug, and then they go out again the next day. And Scotty, in the meantime, he's riddled with these nightmares of falling, and then she, they in the nightmare, he is at Carlotta's childhood home. So they go there and they express their love for each other after 3 days of knowing each other, like you do. So while they're there at this Mission Juan Bautista, which was actually, it's actually the Mission Dolores, which is in San Francisco, but it's Mission San Bautista for their purposes. So that's when she runs into the church runs up the stairs and into the bell tower, and Scotty tries to follow her, but he has that agoraphobia. He has that fear of heights from his accident, and he gets up there just in time, unfortunately, to see her fall to her death onto the roof. Now, because there were no witnesses up there, her death was declared that she had died by suicide. So Gavin doesn't blame him. The husband doesn't blame him, but Scotty, of course, because he was in love with her, blames himself. He's sent to a sanatorium. He's catatonic. And then here comes Midge, because apparently Midge is just likes to self-torture herself. She's there by his side and decides Mozart's going to fix him and all this. And he does get released, and, Midge is still there taking care of him. And while he's out and about, when he's, doing better and he's back out in the city, he sees a woman that reminds him of Madeliene. Now, to me, she looked completely different. Red hair, completely different hairstyle, these very prominent eyebrows that Madeliene most definitely didn't have. Completely different style of makeup, like just a completely different woman. But Scotty's convinced, and he follows her. And she says, no, my name's Judy. I'm from Kansas. And then we find out that Judy is, in fact, Madeliene. And there was this whole plot. And Madeliene did not die by suicide. Madeliene was murdered by her husband. So there's our twist, right? That's our twist, isn't it?
Maybe.
So maybe.
Yeah,
At that point in the movie, I was like, what? Wait, what?
Yeah.
So I was like, maybe I should rewind it. Did I miss a whole scene, a chunk? It was a lot. So what did you think of the twist, Julie, when all that was revealed, with the whole scene of her writing him the letter in her hotel room?
Well, I can assure you that I had a very audible gasp. And I was like, what? No, like you just said, and I was like, yeah, did I miss something? And I was like, no, it can't be. And then I was trying to figure out why the whole plot happened. I was like, but why did he want to kill his wife? What was his motivation behind that? And and the fact that he came up with this whole elaborate scheme, that's a lot of effort into a scheme to kill your wife. I feel like there are other ways that could have been done, but whatever. But yeah, no, I was like, ooh, okay, all right, here's that big Hitchcock plot twist I've been looking for. But as you mentioned, it may not be the only one. But yeah, I was like, what? I didn't see it coming. I don't know why. There was hints of it, but I didn't see it coming.
Yeah, it took me by surprise. How about for you, Carolyn?
So, I want to backtrack I want to talk about two things. Number one, I want to talk about how cool it was, at least to me at this particular point in time, to have a male character put in the situation that Scotty was put in, that Jimmy Stewart was put in, because normally you would see women put in that position. You could very easily see Madeliene put in that position. You could very easily see any of the other female characters put in that position. That would have been something that they brought to that. But seeing a guy in Scotty's state, the 1950s sanitariums were a lot different than current mental health hospitals. But I'm sure we all don't need to know about that. Just to see that was really interesting. And so I do want to shout that film out for that, because I think that, seeing a male character in that level of vulnerability is something that Hitchcock did really well. Hitchcock did really well. He did that really well. He did show male characters in degree of vulnerability that I don't think a lot of people were willing to do back then, because that's, women's stuff. But so gender-wise, at least for me, that was cool to see. And then the other thing, as far as the twist goes, there's so many, it's such a powerful twist, because if you go back and you see it and it hits you, it hit me right here. And you're like, wait, but I guess it didn't surprise me nearly as much, because when you have, well, it did surprise me, but there's so many other things in movies and stuff where they've done something similar, where it's like, oh no, mistaken identity, not mistaken identity, but like, oh, and this, I just, it's so strange. It feels common, which feels like a metaphor for the film itself. It's so weird that you just go back and you're like, well, it has to make sense. It's the literal walking embodiment of Occam's razor.
Yes. And one moment before I get to you, Kenji, I do want to shout out, there's a new subscriber, Sandy, and then also a $15 donation to the Trevor Project. So thank you. Who it looks like it says Non-Talk Network, but I could be reading that wrong. So Kenji, for you, what were your thoughts on this little second bit leading into that twist that Judy was Madeliene?
So I didn't realize that was going to be the setup at first. I just thought this guy is, I saw what he was doing at first. Like, I was like, oh, this is going to be like, at the time, I didn't realize, just like as a kid, I just was very, like confused about what was happening at this point. I was like, oh, is this happening again, kind of thing? But then I realized, and I kind of saw where the story ended up headed. Now as an adult, I watch it and I'm able to see it and analyze it a little bit more, a lot better than I did when I was in college. And it's like, it's like, it's kind of like one of those, it's really interesting to just see just kind of like the obsessiveness that's starting to take a hold of James Stewart's character. And it's, I didn't, at first I didn't realize it was the same person. And it's kind of, it really takes kind of like moments. It wasn't until the final, that moment where you see her in the dark silhouette in the light, that where it kind of like clicked for me, like for truly like, I mean, obviously there's the whole monologue, but like as a kid, that it wasn't until like I actually saw that moment that like I actually really got it. So I don't know, maybe I wasn't paying attention in class because it is spelled out pretty obviously by her, like this is what actually happened. She writes the whole letter. And I feel like actually if they did a modern remake for that, they wouldn't show her writing that letter so soon in the movie. It would be that reveal would be much later, like after the whole ending that we see is when, and then we see like the ramifications of what happens to him because of that. We see that in like a pile of evidence, like it's like in her coat pocket or something, and like she was gonna hand it to him when they got to the top of the tower or something.
This like pull out scene, and then like the music just starts picking up, like dun 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 dun, and he opens it and he's like, oh, what?
Oh, I mean, that would be the modern remake of that for sure. But like it's really kind of interesting to see this, just kind of like this just motif that happens throughout the movie. And I don't know if we're gonna get real deep about it, but like this idea of like the spirals just constantly in all aspects of this story, like the downward spiral of the character, the spiral of the staircases, the spiral of just the scenery just looking the way that it does, and the spiral of the story arc in and of itself. It's just it's really cool. I really like it. It's a great story.
No, I was the same way even yesterday watching it, just like staring at her, trying to find a feature to say that's Kim Novak, because the lip color, they played up her features in such a different way, and then they did her eyebrows, and I finally was able to see just a ghost of her natural eyebrows under the brows they had done, and I'm like, okay, that's her. And then the eyeliner and stuff, but I was like, they did a really good job with her makeup without any kind of prosthetics to just completely change her face. So that was some artistry. So we do have a couple comments here. We have from Cue Ball. If you remember back in the day, The Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock Presents were the top 2 TV series at the time. as far as thriller, horror, sci-fi dominated. But Hitchcock never got credit for his writing because a lot of the stories and characters he wrote were so brilliant and well thought out, but they only think or talk about his directing. He's criminally underrated as a writer, and that's very true. And then Andy says this movie does a great job of highlighting some real trauma and painting some real context of people dealing with grief, which it does. It highlights quite a few different mental health issues, actually, which we're going to get into in the next bit here. Another comment from Cue Ball: if you use this film to raise awareness of mental health and mental illness, because it basically says if you let unmedicated people go without treatment or medication they need, this is what could happen to a person who goes undiagnosed, and then they could do something very wrong to themselves or others. And we're going to talk more about what Scotty shows us his personality to really be like, and then we can kind of talk about, was Scotty always that way, or was that something that came out when he met Madeliene / Judy / Carlotta, whatever this whole situation was. And then Andy added, it all plays into Stewart's performance, and in another actor's hands it wouldn't have succeeded. And that's true. James Stewart, immensely talented actor. So he's run into this woman on the street. He's convinced she's Madeliene. She's like, no, I'm Judy. And then you can tell that scene where he's like, well, let me take you out. And she's like, okay. The tension the tension was, I was just like, they know, he knows it's her. And I was just like,
yeah.
And
I agree.
Oh man, that scene was so well done. But the obsession, this is where Scotty's obsession with Madeliene really just rekindles. I don't think it ever stopped, and it blossoms. And while Judy keeps up her charade, he now has a new project, and that's let's turn Judy into Madeliene. And it gets real creepy real quick. Carolyn, what are your thoughts about his whole, especially the scene with the gray suit? For me, that got really uncomfortable when he was like insisting on her getting that same exact suit, which we know as the audience is still hanging in her closet. But that was just a very strong point of his obsession. How did that make you feel?
Okay, so I have a take on this, and I'm trying to decide when I want to drop this take, if I drop it now because that would make the most sense, or if I wait till the end to kind of conclude my point. And I will save my take on this entire film because this is a big part of it. And instead, I will say I think that it is the way that Jimmy begins to act is an extremely frightening thing. And going into my take, I will simply say that if you look at it from the perspective of a audience member or a fan looking at a movie star, like I said, I'm saving my really big take for the end. If you look at it from the perspective of a fan, an audience member or a fan looking at a movie star and trying to paint them a very specific and certain way, it really changes what you might think about the film.
Okay.
Because I think that his actions or that of someone who is devastated by grief and who is not looking for a sense of who is not seeing her as a sense of healing. He sees her as part of a story that he wants to tell himself.
Okay.
Like I said, I'm saving my really big take for the end. That's
absolutely fair. All right, Julie, what do you think about his very fast slide into this obsession?
It is. It gets real creepy real fast. But it also is sort of a telling look at what, like, how I think like men treated women back then as well, like, because you could tell that, like, you know, the shopkeepers, the retail girls or whatever, they weren't like even like, they were a little bit like, okay, why does he have to have it that's so specific? But when he was like, no, this is what we want, this is what I want, like the way that he said, this is what I want, like not what she wants, this is what I want for her, like that was, I think, very accepted back then. Like, no, I'm going to pick out her clothes. I'm going to pick out her hairstyles, her nails, or whatever, you know, like, I think from what I understand, that was like something that men, just not, maybe not all of the men, but a lot of them did back then, was like, they sort of had control over the way the woman was like living her life. And so like, cause, you know, yeah, I just found that part interesting where like the shop girls weren't even like that taken aback by it. And we're like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever you want, we'll get you whatever you want, you know, like, I was like, yeah, that's interesting. And I don't know that I liked it. But yeah, no, it just kind of gives you that little, like, the kind of icky feeling where you're like, oh no, like, I liked you, Jimmy Stewart, and now I don't know how I feel about you. Like, but, and then it also shows you though how much that Judy still loves him, because she's basically like, yeah, I'm gonna let him do all of this because I love him and I hope that this will make him love me as well. And yeah, it's just a real interesting turn of events for sure.
She's known him for like what, a week?
I know. That's, well, that whole thing,
Yeah.
it does. Their love story seems like it's been going on for a lot longer than it has. Although at that point, hadn't it been like a year or something?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
But they only knew each other for
still.
like 4 days before that.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I feel like their love story feels like it's been happening over the course of years, but then you think about it and you're like, no, actually they fell in love over like 3 days.
Yeah. I mean, hey, still a better love story than
Disney
Twilight.
movies did it too. So, you know, if Disney movies can do it, Hitchcock can do
Sure.
it. Why not?
Absolutely. Kenji, what did you think when our friend Scotty here just went completely off the deep end for her?
So yeah, like I definitely thought it was like, even as a kid, I was kind of like, for me, I hadn't really watched anything with a lot of like depth and like substance a whole lot until that point. So like when I first saw that, it was like, I felt very uncomfortable watching this moment happen, like in a public, in a public place. In a way, I was like, wow, oh, okay. Like I was a little bit like thrown by it, like kind of like the same the shop owner was. I kind of was looking at my teacher like, what's about to happen? And I was also really surprised because I think like just 2 weeks before that we watched Just the Wonder. Oh no, it was like a month before that, because it was right before the holidays. We watched Just the Wonderful Life. So, so
Jimmy Stewart, where have you gone?
yeah, we come back and it's like a completely different story. We're just like, I was just like I was just so surprised by like the amount, just by the range that this guy had. You know, I mean, a lot of people make fun of Jimmy Stewart for being a one-note pony, but like I felt like he kind of showed he's got some he's dense, you know. He's like a really thick sponge cake. He's dense. Like he's got layers,
Yeah.
you know.
I love
got some
that.
tasty layers.
It does. That's one way to put it, yes. So we do have some more input from the chat. First off, Cue Ball created a poll for us.
Oh.
Which Hitchcock film would you introduce a thriller virgin to? The Birds, Psycho, or Vertigo? Vertigo.
Ooh.
What do you think, Julie?
I would say, having seen those other two now as well, I would be tempted to a thriller virgin, you say?
Yes.
I'm gonna say The Birds, because, and my reasoning for that is because I think that Vertigo is maybe a little bit more nuanced, and like it has elements of it that like you wouldn't necessarily expect from like a straight up thriller. And then Psycho is a little bit more intense. So like I feel like The Birds, while it can get intense, is not as intense as Psycho. Just from my memory at this moment, because it's been a while since I've seen both of those two. But like I think that would be a good warm up to somebody, you know, because it gives you still gives you the eerie feeling, the Hitchcock vibe, but without straight up being like, yeah, I killed my mom and I keep her in the attic or wherever he keeps her, I forget. But yeah.
Basement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which one
What is
would
the
you
attic?
so first timer, Kenji?
So it depends on the reason why this person is a thriller virgin.
Okay.
If this person doesn't like things that are bloody, like ultra, like in that sense, like doesn't like seeing people getting like hurt in a sense, then I would go with the birds, because it's like while people are getting injured and stuff like that, it's not like full on someone getting like it's not a human on human crime.
Okay.
So like so it's
Yeah.
a little bit so it's a
Fair.
little bit so it's I feel like it's a little bit easier to consume in that regard. However, if they have no problem in that with that, it's like, oh no, I just don't, I just haven't taken the time for it. Then it's like, oh, then you got to check out Psycho then, because like I feel like that's like one of the first films that people think of when they think Alfred Hitchcock. They think The House. I mean, it's still there at Universal Studios. Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure is.
What do you think, Raelyn? What would you suggest for them?
Well, my initial thought was to ask a question in return, which is, do I know this person very well? And so I'm going to operate on the assumption that I sort of do, but we're not close. In which case, I'm going to say we're starting with Psycho because they have the cultural basis for Psycho, because it is such an iconic film in American culture. That's what draws them in. That's the hook. Then we jump into the birds. Then we jump into Vertigo. And then when I've done that, and I'm building suspense here, I'm like Hitchcock. Okay, I'm building suspense. When I've done that, and at the end, you're going to hear my take about why that's important to close with that one. But yeah, so I will explain all. I'll reveal all, I promise.
Okay, perfect. I would also start with Psycho because I don't sugarcoat things. So you're just going into the deep end, no matter who you are. I would though ask the same as Kenji, like, what is your tolerance for even implied violence? Because obviously in 62, was it 62, 61, that, it was a fairly tame movie. Like, one, are you scared of chocolate sauce on screen? And are you okay if there's a toilet in the movie? Okay, good, go with Psycho. So, the important questions, right?
Yeah.
Let's see.
With toilets? Are you
Okay with the toilet flushing? Let's see.
Oh my gosh.
And Andy did add back to our topic of Jimmy Stewart and his range. It's unsettling how he objectifies the woman that he becomes fixated on. Oh yeah, it's very scary. And then and Andy also added, Hitchcock, for his strength as a director, has a history of pattern behavior against women in his films, which even for his time is awkward with contemporary sensibilities. And that is also true. So it is something definitely to keep in mind. So we've got a little bit of time left, so we're gonna wrap up the little recap of the movie, and then I know Carolyn, I'm excited to hear her wrap up. So I'm gonna just recap the end here. So they were doing this really creepy thing at the department store that made me so uncomfortable. And then they're getting ready for a night out, and all of a sudden, here's this perfect clone of Madeliene, including in this beautiful black dress. I was just like, I need one. And then she very, very insistently says, can you help me with my necklace? And he puts the necklace on her, and she turns around, and he startles because it's Carlotta's necklace from the painting. So now he knows that this is Madeliene. This is, I was at a point where I'm like, did Madeliene exist? What's happening right now? So his obsession with Madeliene now has come full circle, and he decides, we're not going to go to dinner and have that delicious steak at Ernie's. I was so disappointed. They go for a drive, which always is great when someone's obsessed with you and he wants to take a drive down the coast. They go back to the mission, the scene of Madeleine's unfortunate early demise. So he tells her he needs to reenact Madeleine's death because that's the scene that led to his madness. Even though I was like, wait, it's where the cop died. But apparently now we're just talking about his obsession. So he makes her go up into the bell tower. And the whole time during the scene, I was like pushing back in my chair. I'm like, oh God, no, please don't do this. And when they're in the bell tower, this shadowy figure appears, and I screamed like a yelp, not a real scream. She's begging for his forgiveness because she loves him. And when they see the shadowy figure come up, Judy lunges backwards because she's startled. It was a nun. I would lunge backwards if I saw a nun too. Judy falls out the window and falls to her death, unfortunately. But Scotty is sad, but he's no longer afraid of heights. So he stands on the ledge while the nun rings the bell of the mission. And I have a lot of feelings about the end of this, because I just was like, get off the ledge, sir, get inside. I just was like, I don't know. I just was like, that's how it ends. Because there was 2 minutes left on the screen on the little counter. And I'm like, but there's got to be more. But no, that's how it ends. So, Carolyn, I'm saving you for last on this. Kenji, how did you feel about the way this movie ended?
Oh, even as a kid, I just was like, when I first saw it, I was like, wait a minute, hold on. Are you serious? It's like, oh no, she's dead. Well, I'm not afraid of heights now, so I suppose that's something. Like, I just kind of like, I was doing exactly what I was doing right now. As a kid, I just was like, wow, this is really messed up ending. Like, I think we were all just kind of like, no, not Jimmy Stewart, not Jimmy Stewart, not Jimmy Stewart. And then we started making other jokes about like tying it back to It's a Wonderful Life. Like, what if Jimmy threw the cop off the bridge at the end? And then he just started throwing his family off the bridge, and then he started throwing everyone else in the town off the bridge. But like, Chuck. I mean, it was the only way we could just really, it's because it's a very serious thing that he did. It's so unnerving what he did, and it's almost like the only way that we could really cope with it as kids at the time was just to like laugh about it, because it was like it was such a very uncomfortable moment. And it's, I mean, and looking back on it now, though, like as like analyzing it, it's obviously just such a tragic, and it's a tragic but such an inevitable ending that it just kind of makes you just go like, I mean, it's inevitable in the sense of the way that events have now been set. Mm-hmm. There's no other way, I feel like. And it's a very heavy ending for sure, that probably won't be for everybody.
No, definitely. Julie.
First of all, Kenji, thank you for that Jimmy Stewart impression.
Yes.
I was waiting for somebody to do a Jimmy Stewart impression.
Yeah, and like, Andy called it out.
Andy
called it out in the chat and said, "Pitch Perfect, Dana Carvey, Jimmy Stewart."
Yep.
Oh, that's right. I forgot Dana Carvey did Jimmy Stewart too.
Oh, he did, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Oh my God, so good. But yeah, unnerving, heavy. I agree with those things that you said. And yeah, I was kind of felt like you did, like Jennifer, where I was like what? Like, there's not more. But yeah, I do agree. Like, it kind of felt like it did have to happen this way. I feel like the way it was leading up, I thought it had to be one or the other of them had to die, like, because they both clearly had some very deep-seated issues, like, you know. And one thing I will say that Alfred Hitchcock is really good at is making his like themes and his stories kind of arrive at the point of like, choices were made and these are the consequences of those choices, you know. Like this is definitely like, you know, things could have gone a lot differently if she had just left that letter and left town, or they could have gone a lot differently if he had just kind of like buzzed off, or, you know, different, you know, like, but these were the choices that were made. And so these are the consequences of those actions, you know. And I appreciate that, because I think not all movies and not all directors, writers do that. You know, they're like, oh, we're just gonna let people get off scot-free at the end, or we're just gonna switch things around or whatever. And I'm like, no, this makes sense. Like, these, it's sad, it's tragic, because especially it's Jimmy Stewart. You did not want to see Jimmy Stewart take that dark decline, but he did, and it was, and that's what it was. So yeah, no, it was. And the dark shadowy figure, I was trying to figure out, sorry, I'm trying to wrap this up quick, but I was trying to figure out if she thought that maybe it was like Carlotta's ghost or something like that, because again, it's those vague supernatural, like subtle supernatural references that Hitchcock was kind of going for in this movie. And then the other things I mentioned in the beginning that I said I felt like there's some plot points that were left unwrapped up, and one of them was Midge, like what the heck happened to her after she visited him that last time. Then no more plot with Midge. And like I was really wondering what happened to her, and I'm still wondering why the husband wanted to kill the wife, other than maybe his motivation being like he just really needed to get out of San Francisco and thought that if he had his wife he had to stay there because of the ship business. But like, is that a reason to kill? I don't know. Anyways, lots of unanswered questions, but a good ending nonetheless.
Yes. All right, Carolyn, the floor is yours.
Vertigo is about filmmaking. So when I first saw the ending, I was like, okay, this doesn't make any sense to me. And I felt that heart thing in my chest. So I Googled it. And when you Google it, it comes up like, what is the most famous thing about Vertigo? It's someone had interpreted it. And the more I listened to you guys, the more I was thinking about it, and the more it made sense. Someone had interpreted that Jimmy Stewart was Alfred Hitchcock and the way that he treated his starlets. Jimmy Stewart, in fact, so Alfred Hitchcock was famous, and all of the men in Hollywood arguably were famous at the time and still are, for treating women in a very specific way, because they wanted them to seem a certain, they wanted to have a certain thing. But apparently Hitchcock did that a lot. And like, so they always had a very specific look. They always had a very specific feel. They were, if you will, haunted by previous characters that he had created. Vertigo is about filmmaking because Jimmy Stewart's character is Hitchcock. He is a man struggling with his own obsession over a very specific type of woman.
One Tippi Hedren.
Yeah. No, one that he knows inherently is wrong, one that he knows inherently is detrimental. So when I was saying, look at it from the perspective of an audience member, because in a way, Stewart is also the audience. He is the everyman. He is attempting to craft the perfect figure in his story by forcing the women to conform to a very specific set of ideals. You don't need to know where Midge goes, because Midge is a day player. She's a bit player. You don't need to know the motive for the person who wants him to kill his wife, because the guy's the writer. He just wants to tell the story. From a storytelling perspective, if you don't see it as a metaphor, you see it instead as a story where, all these things don't make sense. They don't need to. It's not about the story that they're telling. It's about one man's obsession with a very specific kind of woman and telling stories about that particular woman. So when I say that I want to include Vertigo at the very end, it's because you have Psycho, you have The Birds, and you have Vertigo, which is about one man's obsession with a woman who has been haunted by the two previous films. Thank you.
A neat little bow.
Wow.
Very nice.
I never would have thought about it that way. I like that.
It just goes to show you that as much as we love entertainment, there's quite a lot to discuss psychologically about it. And even, I would argue, Stewart's portrayals of grief and his inability to let go. And the idea of a shock, an idea that a shock could bring somebody out of that. It's like, well, when if you have a traumatic experience, where what is the end of it? If not, a trigger warning on a film.
Yeah.
So,
all right.
So that is my golden take, is that, and I can't take credit for it. I did pull it from Google, but the more I was listening to you guys, the more I put it together that, Vertigo is a dark, twisted fantasy story It's got mild paranormal elements, but it turns out at the end that human beings are the bad guys. But you don't need to solve the plot points because it's about a writer who gives a script to a director, and the director tries to shape a woman in the image that he wants the script to be, but the film doesn't end well. So,
all right. Well, that is all the time we have to talk about Vertigo tonight. I want to thank you so much to my guests, Kenji, Julie, and Carolyn. Carolyn, where can everybody find you on social media?
Oh, you can find me at Carolyn in Fandom on Twitter. My takes are not that spicy normally. Mostly I've been posting about the Five Nights at Freddy's movie because I finally got a trailer for it. But also mostly about current union actions and everything else in Hollywood, which I feel very passionate and strongly about. And Disney stuff. So Carolyn in Fandom, Caroline_cosplay on TikTok. And that's basically it. That's where I'm at. Awesome. Julie, where can we find you?
I am at Raelyn on Instagram, JRAELYN. And I can be found on TikTok at JRaelady, JRAELADY. Those are pretty much my primaries. I'm sorry, I have like an alarm going off on a watch somewhere that I don't know how to turn off. So I apologize if anyone can hear that. But yeah, I am on Twitter too at Silent Caffeine, but I'm not on Twitter as much. So, but yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Kenji, how about you? Naturally.
If you want to find me on the socials, I am at Kenjinator. You can find me on TikTok and on Instagram. You can also find me on Twitch at the Kenjinator. But on Sundays, I'm part of the Dungeons and Dragons campaign with my dad at KDNLA. It starts at noon. We go until about 3. Check us out. It'll be a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun. So yeah, last time I Kamehameha'd a giant crocodile. So.
Yes. Cool. Awesome. And you can find me on Instagram at do_as_Peggy says. And you can find my awesome Avengers cosplay group at California Avengers on Instagram. Thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to join our Discord to keep the conversation going, as well as subscribing to all our platforms at Nom Talk Network. Tune into our next show, and I forgot what it was, and I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh. Until then, I am your host, Jennifer. I'm going to go put my head down for that one. And you guys have a nomorific day. Thank you so much.